Hello YouTube and welcome to an all new Elder Scrolls lore video. This time on a very obscure lore subject, the Pale Order. Now, this particular subject is so obscure that at the time of writing this script there are no articles on the subject on either the Elder Scrolls wiki, so not on the wiki or the UESP. Maybe there will be after this video, but there's no articles at this time, so yeah, that's always a proud moment to be ahead of those guys and at least be sure that you have some new information for a lot of people. Alright, self-glorification aside, let's talk about the Pale Order. Alright, so back in the First Era, a large part of current-day High Rock was ruled over by elves, specifically the Durani Elves. These Durani Elves had a large sphere of influence in which different elven kingdoms with their own rules and policies all banded together in what was called the Durani hegemony. The hegemony became very big at one point, with the Durani expanding the hegemony into northern Hammerfell and even some western and southern parts of Skyrim. At one point, however, they wanted more, and they decided to invade the Alessian Empire of Cyrodiil. Unfortunately for the Durani, this turned out into a disaster, as the Alessian forces counterattacked and invaded the hegemony. With the help of the Nords and some of the last ever allied armies to ever walk the face of Tamriel, the hegemony managed to defeat the invading Alessians, but this initial military catastrophe made the hegemony militarily weak. And this weakness was used by the peoples living under the Durani rule, mostly humans living under elven rule, to throw off the rule of their elven masters. This is a very short excerpt from the history of the Durani hegemony, but if you want to know the full story, I recommend watching my video on them for the full story where I go into all these matters in much more detail. That video is in the description of this one. Anyway, in some of the kingdoms where the humans had been treated relatively fairly under elven rule, the transition from elven to human rule came in mostly peaceful forms. But in other Durani kingdoms of the hegemony where humans had been oppressed under elven rule, the former Durani elven rulers were forcibly driven out by the humans, and in some kingdoms, elves were even fully hunted down and exterminated by the humans, and there were even some Breton knightly orders that came to be with the sole purpose of hunting down elves and the former rulers. One of the knight orders hunting down the Durani elves in the oppressed kingdoms was the Pale Order, a ghastly order of knights which hunted down elves living in High Rock with an almost obsession-like ferocity. They worked for the noble house Aramin, who were vassals of the despot king called Festrian Spenard I, who was likely some sort of warlord who grabbed power from the Duranis after they were overthrown in some of the oppressive kingdoms. House Aramin either founded or fully funded the Pale Order. The order worked in their name and was almost fully dedicated to the extermination of elves in High Rock. The Pale Order was quite sinister, and that even started with their coat of arms, since this order's coat of arms was grim to say the least, since it had boars and nooses on it, which is ominous to say the least, especially the nooses. The Knights of the Order were strong and cold, but the thing that made them stand out most was the fact that they all operated solo, often going on solo missions, exterminating whole groups of enemies by themselves, with their motto being victory unaided, death unsung, austerity, autonomy, and ferocity. The greatest accomplishment a knight could attain within the order is to best a great enemy all by themselves, and if the knights managed to defeat an important or great enemy, they would etch the name of their enemy in their weapons or armor. It wasn't strange to find the names of elven commanders on the scabbards, shields, helmets, or swords of the Pale Order, and sometimes the knight in question would even etch the way in which the enemy was slain on their scabbard as well. The Knights of the Order didn't only fight alone, but it said that they fully dedicated themselves to their craft, remaining alone in life. They did not marry, they did not found families, and they did not search the company of others in everyday life. They kept their own counsel and traveled and dined alone. They rarely had contact with nobles, likely not even those of House Aramin who founded or funded them. According to legend, the reason the Knights of the Order were able to take down that many enemies by themselves is because they got stronger with every enemy they slew on the battlefield, taking out whole villages by themselves. It's said that the Knights of the Order were often drenched in blood as they kept on fighting and getting stronger, mowing down enemies as if they were nothing. And there's a good explanation for that, as a lesser known credo of the Order was vigor through blood, meaning that they get their strength from the blood of their enemies. The Order kept this credo a bit of a secret according to witnesses from at the time, because The people of High Rock suspected the Order to be vampires because of their strange ability to take life and energy from their enemies. But they weren't vampires. The truth was that each of the knights has a special signet ring, a symbol of membership of their order. These rings, however, were no normal trinkets, as the rings of the Pale Order were powerful artifacts infused with dark magical effects. The ring allowed them to absorb their enemies' energy and life energy, hence the credo, Vigor through blood. The rings were likely also a big reason for their isolated lifestyles. Putting the rings on one's finger made one feel very powerful, but also gave the wearer a deep and dark nagging paranoia ingrained inside their brains, meaning that they did not just prefer to fight alone, but they simply did not trust anyone to fight with them. For their ferocity, they were rightly feared by elves over all of High Rock, and while their names have been forgotten by most humans by now, the remaining Durani Elves on the Isle of Balfira still remember them, and some say that simply mentioning the Pale Order can lead to banishment from the Durani society that still remains on the island. Once all ruling elves on the mainland had been exterminated, however, from the territories that the Order focused themselves on, they focused themselves on great enemies for a while, so on trolls, goblins and the exterminations of other fearsome creatures. But without their true purpose of driving out the elves, the Order seems to have quickly gone defunct and eventually abandoned somewhere in the second half of the First Era. Their rings have lost all their meaning by now, and only a select few still know what they represent. Some noble collectors still have some of the rings in their collection, like for example Baron Allard Dorrel is said to have one of the rings in his private collection, but that's basically the only one currently known to be in the possession of an identified individual on Tamriel. In the Elder Scrolls Online you can get one of these rings as a player, and it can be very overpowered for your build. I use one myself as well, at the advice of Mr. Christmas, who I mention at the end of every video. This is since it helps you drain a part of the damage that you do to enemies as health for yourself, but it requires a lot of grinding to get this ring, but you know, at least there's some cool lore behind the ring and the Order. And that is basically the lore on the Pale Order. Definitely a cool tidbit of lore I managed to pick up, if I say so myself, and I hope you also found it interesting. If you did, consider returning for more Elder Scrolls lore videos in the future, or watch some of my previous videos. I've made a lot of them over the past 5 years. Anyway, before I end the video, allow me to thank my top patrons Mr. Bernardo Binda, Gabriel Binda, Sword of Bushido, Tsar Mikhail and of course Mr. Christmas. These wonderful people, along with all the others on screen, make my weekly lore videos possible, and for that I am very grateful. They basically keep the channel the way it is. Anyway, expect a video in the middle of the week, next week, since I lost a bet to my own Discord server, and then one in the weekend after. See ya!